We're super excited to have you here, Mike. Thanks for being here.
My
Um,
pleasure.
just a couple of housekeeping. If folks want to keep their microphone off, that would be awesome while Mike is chatting. Um, and then if you don't want to be on camera, that's fine too. You can go ahead and turn your cameras off. We are going to be recording this session, so it'll be up on our YouTube page. Um, and I just also want to take a moment to acknowledge the indigenous peoples on whose land we're gathered here today in the Los Padres. That is the Esalen, the Tataviam, the Costanoan, and the Chumash peoples. And we're so honored to be on this beautiful land that they hold sacred since time immemorial. And with that, I will pass it over to Dr. Mike Shaw, who's been so grateful for him in doing these amazing webinars. Thank you, Dr. Shaw, and take it away.
Well, thank you, Kendra, for the kind introduction and for the folks joining us this evening, and for those joining the replay later. My name's Mike. Please call me Mike. And if you have any questions during the presentation, you can just raise your hand and we'll get to you, or you can type it into the chat box and we'll do our best to answer it there. I'm going to basically talk for a while and then kind of go around the room and like, what do you think about that? What do you think about that? So be on your guard for that. But no, it's great to be here. As I've mentioned in the past, I have a long history with the Los Padres and just been many times, solo backpacking throughout it. I've used Brian's maps and Craig's guidebook and, Dennis Gagnon's guidebook and all that good stuff. And it's just a real great place to me. And what I want to do this evening is to share with you some insights that you might find useful if you decide to try to capture the night skies in the Los Padres photographically. So with that, I'm just going to dive into this and just get started. So this is like, night photography 101. And there's a number of different things that are available to you to photograph in the Los Padres. We talked about many of these last time, so I'll just do a quick sort of recap. There's the summer Milky Way. This is the best time of the year to be photographing this view of the Milky Way. In June, July, and August is when you really want to be thinking about planning your shots around the summer Milky Way. There's a couple people, as we were just getting ready, mentioned an interest in photographing the moon. So this is the supermoon of May 2012 over Mount Whitney. So it's certainly not in the Los Padres, but it's a great shot to, I've watched the moon come up over the Topa Topa Mountains in Ojai a bunch of times, and it's just a beautiful sight, that pink moon. We talked about constellations last time. We talked about star trails last time. We talked about light painting. And my personal favorite from 48 hours ago in Zabriskie Point in Death Valley, we have the eclipsed moon, the blood super flower moon against the Milky Way. The cool thing about this is Zabriskie Point, and this is the moon right here. And normally if you had a full moon right here, all of this is completely washed out by the blue sky. That's just not visible in any way, shape, or form. So what's neat about this is the chance to actually see those objects that are normally hidden by the moon. So anyway, that was a great shot, and catching up on the sleep from that. It was kind of a last minute thing. If you have any questions or want to really learn about any stuff I'll be talking about, this is my shameless plug for my 2 books on night photography, A Complete Guide to Landscape Astrophotography. Really ties together astronomy and night photography, and then the Creative Nightscapes and Time Lapses book really goes into sort more complex night photography projects. So they're both, great reviews on Amazon. We're just going to dive into it then in terms of getting stuff going. So I'm going to start off by talking about gear and settings. And if you're a photography person at all, you probably have what you need to do basic night photography. You just need a tripod and a ball head and a camera and a lens. And I bet you have that. Many, cell phones. Cell phones, the cameras and cell phones are sufficiently capable of capturing really high quality night photography images. And, so this is really what we've got. But let me just say a few features about the camera that you're going to want to make sure that you have before you start taking images at night. And there's two key things. The first one is to make sure your camera has the ability to set the focus manually. So you have a manual focus capability, like I'm showing here at the top. And then that you also have the ability to set the exposure manually. So this would be, the ISO and the aperture and the shutter speed. And once you have these two things under manual control, then you're really all set to go. I mean, you really, these are the only things that would prevent you from being able to capture images at night. In terms of what lens to use, this is just one example with the Milky Way showing you the effects of different lens focal lengths on the images that you get. And it really has to do with the angle of view or the field of view that's available with these different lenses. So if you start in the upper left where we have a 16mm fisheye lens, you can see you get an enormous view of the sky. And then as you start, with a 14mm rectilinear lens, the bottom left, and then a 24mm, 50mm, and 105mm, you can see you really just basically zoom in on different parts of the night sky. So this is something that when I first started, really in photography back in the day, I'm sort of a science engineering type person, and I had no idea what these numbers meant at all. I mean, 50mm, I thought, well, that must be important. It must be different than 14mm, but I couldn't tell you why. And you eventually get to the point where it's kind of like, oh, I need a knife instead of a fork. So that's, you reach for the fork and then that type of a thing. But if these seem like a foreign language, don't worry, because with practice, it'll become very intuitive. All right, so we're going to get down to some details here. I know this is being recorded, so thank goodness for that. So you don't have to worry about taking notes. I've got a couple slides on camera settings. Well, camera settings and then exposure settings. So the first thing is, as I mentioned, when you're setting up your camera, you want to make sure it's in manual focus with manual exposure. And the reason that these two things are so important is the focusing ability of your camera and the exposure ability of your camera. They just don't work at night. There's not enough light. I should correct myself and say some of the more recent models, Olympus has a model, Sony has a model, a couple of models that allow you to focus at night, but they're the exception at this time rather than the rule. So one of the things we're going to spend time talking about tonight is how to manually focus your camera. It's ugly. I know it's terrible. We all struggle with it, but we got to learn how to do it. And then to set the exposure, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. That's a lot easier. You just want to make sure your auto ISO is off. Sometimes this is can throw a curveball into the mix. I recommend setting a white balance of daylight, really, even though we're at night. But the sky color is very much the same as natural daylight. So that's a good way to go. And then if you have a long exposure noise reduction setting on your camera, you want to switch that off. And then you want to be shooting in a raw file format, of course. And I'm sure most of the people watching are going to be doing this because of the high image quality that you get from this. All right, let's talk about our exposure settings. I have a few slides I want to talk about here because this is where there's always a certain amount of debate, and I just want to provide my input for your consideration. If you're starting off in the Los Padres in a dark site, maybe you're I don't know, Big Pine Mountain area, back in the Sespe a little ways, away from Santa Barbara and Ojai and Ventura in the front country, then these would be good settings to use. An ISO of around 3200, an aperture pretty much wide open. I mean, the lowest f-stop or lowest number that you have on your lens is what you want to use, is my recommendation. Maybe one or two little clicks above that, but not much. And then in terms of a shutter speed, I would start with 10 or 20 seconds and then see what you get. So, your manual focus, talk about how to do that, set these settings, and then just click. You're not going to break your camera. You can't hurt your camera by trying any of this stuff out. So you get your first image and then you look at it and you say, maybe it's too bright, maybe it's too dark, but it is what it is. I'm going to say a little experiment that you can, a little exercise that I'm going to suggest you can try at home to kind of dial all this stuff in. But these are kind of the golden range of settings for most night photographs. Now, a word about the shutter speed, because you'll see here at the bottom, I say adjust as needed. Well, thanks, Mike, for that. First, you might want to change the ISO to raise the ISO if it's too dark or lower it. And then you can adjust the shutter speed. Let's say a word about the shutter speed, because this is something that you may come across. And you're going to hear at some point someone talking about the rule of 500, which is pretty much obsolete right now, or the rule of 300, which is a little bit better. Or you could try the rule of 100. But however these rules go, What these rules of these numbers are used for are they're used to determine the longest shutter speed you can use without getting visible star movement. Because the main issue with night photography is the stars are moving across the sky. Well, the stars in the sky are moving together. They're moving across your field of view. And you don't really want to have that happen in your images. So this allows you to figure out how long you can keep the shutter open before you see that. And what you can see, the little equation down here, the relationship, because the answer to that question is called the maximum shutter speed. And the way you calculate the maximum shutter speed is you take the number 300 and you simply divide that by the focal length of the lens that you're using, or the zoom, in millimeters. Super easy. Excuse me. Here's an example. So let's suppose we have a 50 millimeter lens, real common lens for constellations and other things. So in this case, the maximum shutter speed would be the number 300 divided by 50, and that gives you 6 seconds. So that means that if you have and it doesn't matter about the ISO or the aperture, this is strictly a focal length effect. So for any 50 millimeter lens at any aperture setting, if you have an exposure longer than 6 seconds, you're probably, if you zoom in, going to see the stars making little lines in the image. So if you have a 20-second, if you have a 20-second exposure here, you're definitely going to see some lines. So this is kind of the little asterisk by the those golden settings I was suggesting. So here's some results just for some real common maximum shutter speeds, in a practical sense. These are the numbers that I use when I go shooting with these different focal lengths. So when you have a wide angle lens, 14 millimeters, you can get away with 20 seconds. And I do a lot of my night photography with this, wide angle of a lens because it gives a lot of sky. And it makes sense when you think about it, because a wide angle lens has a wide field of view. So even if the stars are moving a little bit, it doesn't take up a lot of the field of view. But if you get down to 70 millimeters, that same motion is going to take up a lot more because you're zoomed in. It's going to take a lot greater percentage of the field of view. So that's why you have to limit your shutter speed when you go to longer focal lengths. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out because you're going to come across that inevitably in discussing things with people. And I just wanted to give you the background on that. And there's some other things, like if you're pointing north or south, you can go a little bit longer because the stars aren't moving as fast, but that's the thing. But here's something I suggest you try at home, especially if you're just getting started in night photography. I call this the ultimate exposure exercise. I do this on all my workshops on the first night if it's clear. It's super helpful because it gives you the answer to what settings should I use. I mean, you can ask 10 different people and you're going to get 10 different answers. And ultimately, you want to have your own, you don't just want to like, well, such and so said this. You want to say, well, I'm basing this on my own experience, and this is how you get that experience. And it's really easy to do. It takes about 10 minutes max. Is you essentially the way we do it in the field is I have everyone set their ISO to 12,800. And then we get a 20-second exposure, and then a 10-second exposure, and a 5-second exposure, and a 2.5-second exposure. Simple. Then I have them reduce their ISO down from 12,800 to 6,400. We do the same thing. Then down to 3,200, do the same thing. And then we change the ISO to 1,600, do the same thing. So why did we do that? Well, we've got basically an image for basically any, I mean, you may change your ISO to a higher value. You may go longer than 20 seconds. You're probably not going to go much shorter than 2.5 seconds. So this is the matrix of possibilities that you're going to use for creating your night photography images. And then if you look at this carefully, check this out. All of these images that I've marked in red all have the same equivalent exposure. A 20-second ISO 1600 image is going to have the same brightness as a 10-second, half as long, but with twice the ISO, and with a 6400, So what's interesting about this is then if you actually look at these images, you can see, this is one of the figures from one of my books, that all of these images along a diagonal have the same brightness. They have the same equivalent exposure, but the ones up here at the top, because they have a much longer time, 20 seconds, they're going to have more star trailing than the ones down here at 5 seconds. But the ones at higher ISO are going to have more noise than the ones at the lower. So it's kind of like up to you. Do you prefer, are you okay with, like, I usually shoot up here at 12,820 seconds. I just want all the light I can get. But, you know, it's really a question of, do you, what's your threshold, your tolerance threshold for noise and for star trailing? And anyway, give this little experiment a try. This is what it looks like, and then decide which of these combination of settings you like. And this is going to change. I mean, you might find that you know, somewhere along the SESP, you're going to have one type of settings that you prefer. But if you go way up, I don't know, towards uh, way in the backcountry by New Koyama or something like that, or the Carrizo Plains, you might have a much different type of setting. So it's somewhat variable, but just give it a shot. And I think you'll find that to be valuable. Okay. So those are the basic camera settings, you know, manual exposure, manual focus, daylight, white balance, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's good. All right, now let's talk a little bit about other simple accessories. A red headlight, you probably already have this. Super valuable at night. It keeps your your night vision protected. You can see at night. It's on your head, so your hands are free, and it's always pointing where you want it to point. So it's great for safety. And actually, here's a funny story. I don't know if I told this last time, but there's when I was once mountain biking, I think, I'm trying to remember the name. It was the Cold Springs Trail or something like that. It was right behind Santa Barbara. A friend of mine and I rode our bikes to the top. Got dark. We didn't have any headlights. Pitch black. And now we're stuck because we have to ride our bikes down this trail, and we can't see anything. Cold Springs Trail, maybe that was it. It's been a while. And then these two mountain bikers showed up, and they had headlights. I was like, right on. So these mountain bikers, so we see them come. We were like partway down when we got basically stuck. We couldn't like go much further because it was so dark. I mean, it was dark. And these two guys came down the trail, and we like, hey, can we ride with you? We don't have lights. They're like, sure. So they were blasting down the trail, and we were just blasting along with them. And then they wanted to talk to us. So whenever they would talk to us, they'd look at us, and they had these lights, and they were like, no, don't aim those at us. Aim those at the trail. So anyway, it's just kind of one of those funny little settings about headlights, but there you have it. A shutter release is super helpful. This thing locks. You can do like multiple exposures. You can get an intervalometer to do like setting it up for time lapse, setting your camera up for time lapses, for star trails, for super long exposures. If you want to do like most cameras have a built-in limit of about 30 seconds, and you can program in like several minutes of exposure if that's what you'd like to do if you mount your camera on a tracker, for example. And then here's a kind of a great trick is most tripods will have one of these little hooks. I don't know if you can see it right here. It's a little built-in hook that you can hang a weight from to stabilize your tripod. And this is a great way to, especially if it's breezy, it just keeps everything, you know, stable. So you don't, if you bump into the tripod, then God forbid the whole thing doesn't collapse over. And then when you're set up, I mean, this is me in Minnesota on a moonlit night. I've got a couple of cameras here. I've got my waterproof boots on because everything's a swamp here with ticks, and you know, just getting ready to shoot the night sky. So it's not an elaborate setup at all, but that's about it. So, you know, when we look back at some of these images, I've kind of zoomed in on this one a little bit, but this was shot with a 14 millimeter lens with an ISO of 8,000, 20 seconds, f3.5. This is the summer Milky Way. This is not dissimilar to what you're going to get in the Los Padres. This is a moon rising over a barn here in Minnesota, and 500 millimeters. I mean, that's a fairly long telephoto lens, and you need that to get this size of a moon in the image. ISO of 1,000, f8 for a fraction of a second, 320th of a second. And then for this constellation, this is of course the Big Dipper and Ursa Major. This is a 24 millimeter lens, very, very popular lens focal length with an ISO of 5,000, f4.5 in 20 seconds. And then this is a Star Trails image, which was this is the same shot that had me in it, setting up those cameras, 14 millimeters, ISO 3200, f3.5 for 5 seconds. So, you know, that's a pretty straightforward thing in terms of how to apply those settings. Let me just say a quick word about being outdoors at night, because I suspect most of the people watching this evening are very comfortable being outdoors at night, but I'll just say that it can take a little bit of getting used to, because you kind of get sort of freaked out a little bit by being outdoors at night. And it's quite common. And when this happens to you, just go with it. Just, don't bail out. Just give it some time. Cut yourself a break, and everything's going to be just fine. All right. So I've been talking for a little bit. Let me just stop this for a second and say hello, and see if anyone's got any questions. Aaron, Kendra, Greg, Dino, or Brian.
Yeah, this is, hi, how are you?
Good.
I don't know if you can hear me.
I can hear you. A little quiet, but it's fine.
Oh, sorry. Shoot, I had a question and I can't remember it. It's when you're saying the the focal length, those are on a full format, correct?
Yes.
Okay. That was my question.
Okay. Yeah. So if you think back to that slide, the rule of 500, and you divide that by the focal length, the assumption there is that's a full frame focal length. So if you have a camera with a crop factor, then you would apply the crop factor to whatever focal length you're using to first calculate the full frame equivalent, and then use the full frame equivalent in that formula.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
For sure. Thanks for asking, Dino. Kendra, what do you think?
So my question is more about the iPhones, and I think you're going to come to that, right?
Maybe, maybe not. That's as good a time as any.
Maybe not. Okay. Well, so are there like night photography apps on the iPhone, or do you just recommend like adjusting your camera settings? Yeah, I'm at a pretty novice level. So
Yeah. No, well, first, great to be out there shooting, because what I'd recommend is practice in a city environment with lights, street lights.
okay.
Because when you're out, the thing about being out in the dark is your phone is kind of lost. It doesn't have a reference point. It doesn't have an anchor of anything to like make a calculation against, because everything is just so dim. And I think I've got a 12. I think I've got a 12. It doesn't. I don't know that I can set the ISO and the shutter speed on it. Maybe yours can, but yeah, it may just be sort of a built-in set of parameters that you are kind of just living with what it's got. I mean, mine, if I do a night mode, it does 3 seconds if I hold it, and it does a pretty good job. But when it's really dark, I find that it just doesn't cut it. So don't be disappointed, because you're not doing anything wrong. And there are some apps that may extend that shutter speed to some degree, but the built-in iPhone software is very sophisticated. And I think it would be tough for the app builders to outperform the Apple people for doing that. So I mean, the apps that I've seen advertised are fine, but they still don't quite. But yeah, in terms of getting a DSLR, you can often get a really good one used from a friend. Photographers are always trying to trade in their gear. Aaron's probably going to try to trade in at some point, or Brian or Dino or Greg or something, or me, or I don't know. I don't know, but the key thing is just to be out there trying stuff out, I guess, more than anything else, because if you wait until everything's perfect, it's just never going to happen. And there's so many things you learn about the constellations, like, oh, I see Jupiter comes up then, and then 3 months ago it totally doesn't come up then because it's moved, but the constellation comes up then. And how big are things, and what's the right time of the month, and how things change from month to month. Like, oh, in August it was, in June it was here, and now it's over here. In July at the same time, and now it's over here. And it's just, I'm constantly learning things about the night sky. So with the iPhone, or just a pair of binoculars, or there's no written in stone set of procedures you have to follow. So
that's really good advice, Mike.
Yeah. Good. Aaron.
I do have a quick question. Yeah. One thing, if you do have, I was going to suggest, if you do have any type of digital camera or anything, there are apps that are basically light meters. And so you can actually use your app, the light meter app, to kind of judge on how to adjust your digital camera. So I found that that helps me quite a bit when I can't kind of dial it in. It'll tell me what settings I should be on, and I'll go from there. The question I have is, when you're shooting film, I haven't dabbled in film too much, but I've been getting more and more into it. Do you have any recommendations besides kind of this light meter app that I've been using or is there a rule of thumb when using film?
Sure. Yeah, no, there's several different ways to approach that. And again, it's an excellent question. So just let's go back to your comment about the light meter app and using it. So the key to any type of I'll say successful photography is when you look at a scene, if it's indoors, like I'm indoors right now, and there's light coming at me, or if I'm outdoors at night, there's light, or if I'm outdoors at the daytime, and the amount of light that comes into your camera's lens. So when I, take my camera and aim it at a scene, and the light comes into the scene, it's a little bit like how much heat am I gathering? It's like how much, a good analogy is to think of these as little like lightning bugs or honeybees. Like how many bees are coming in? If it's really bright, I've got this like, all these bees busting on the way in. If it's really dark, a bee may come in every couple minutes type of a thing. And that's called the light value, the LV. That's the scene, the light value of the scene. How much light is in the scene? And then when you adjust your ISO and your shutter speed and your aperture, what's confusing is there's 3 things you can adjust there, and you can like little things. And if you raise one up, you can lower one down and still have the same thing. But those 3 things control what's called the exposure value of your camera. And the key is to match the exposure value with the light value. And when those 2 things match, then you have a nice exposure. And so what these light meters will do, and your camera actually has a built-in light meter, just doesn't work at night. So it's cool. I'm not familiar with the apps that do this. What any light meter will do is it will tell you what is the scene light value. What is the light value of the scene? And then once you have that light value, you can then calculate, or you can look up, there's definitely apps that do this, a combination of ISO, shutter speed, and aperture that will give you the appropriate exposure value to match the scene's light value. So that's a very helpful way to think of it, I think, because it's otherwise you're not just flailing around, trial and error. So the key to recap is if you can use what a light meter does. A meter measures something, and what it measures is the light, how much light the scene has. And you say, okay, this is how much light I have. I want to match that with my camera's exposure. And so then you can say, well, if I have a light value, a scene light value of, let's say 14, which is very bright, then I want to have my exposure value on my camera to be 14. A Milky Way light value might be -6 or -5 in a dark site. So all I have to do is adjust my ISO, aperture, and shutter speed to give me an exposure value of -5 or -6. And then when I do my exposure, it looks great. So that's kind of the key with that. In terms of film, I guess I haven't done a lot of night photography on film. It's been many, I don't want to say decades, but many, many, many years. And your question was, how do you approach the metering for a film exposure?
Yeah, because you can't really take a photo and like, oh, what was that like? Because you won't know until you get developed.
Yeah, I mean, what I would do is I would essentially, the good news is that people have now pretty well documented the exposure, the scene, the light value of the scenes for most, like a moonless dark night in a light unpolluted area, or a full moon, or a quarter moon, or a crescent moon, or if you have this type of a light pollution. And then once you have that scene's light value, then you can calculate the combination of aperture, shutter speed, and ISO to match that. So it is a little bit of a, I mean, I have to say, I'm a lazy person, so I try to minimize my output of energy in any circumstance. So I do a lot of trial and error when I get to, like when I did that Death Valley scene, I was like, I had a sense of, I thought it was going to be an ISO of 400 f5.6 for 250th of a second. And it was close, but it wasn't exactly, I can't remember now what it was, but it wasn't exactly those things. I had to do a couple clicks here and there. And so that's part of the fun though. I mean, I guess that's, to me, that is so what people would do, what I used to do is I just carried a little notebook,
Mm,
and I had a 24 exposure roll of film or 36, and I would just write down the frickin' ISO and then the shutter speed and the aperture for each exposure. And you might do at ultimate exposure, just dedicate a roll of film to that. Say, I'm going to start at 12,800, click, 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 6,400, click, 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 click. And then just, if you're organized, you can take those images, reference images, and use those. They're incredibly valuable. I mean, you wouldn't believe the number of times someone's raised an issue. And it's like, well, look, here's the picture. What do you think? And just having the actual image to back up your thinking. And even if they don't agree with you, who cares? I mean, for your own sanity and for your own, like, going forward, at least you got a sense of where to go.
yeah.
So
Cool.
I'm a great, you're not going to hurt your camera.
Yeah.
It might hurt your budget a little bit, but just have fun. It's just it's so easy to kind of like, oh man, I should be doing this certain way that I don't know what it is. And it's like, I hate that. It's just not like that at all. It's just more about just getting out there and trying some stuff out. And, really dark images, you can see the star colors beautifully. Really bright images, all the stars are white because they're overexposed, but you can see a lot of the foreground. So it's like, well, there's something in there no matter what. So you can't, in my opinion, you can't really go wrong.
Cool. Thank you.
You bet. Well, great. Okay, well, let's just keep going and see what we got here. And I know there's some interest in the, where did my little pointer go? Oh no, I lost my pointer. No, there it is. In the moon. So I want to make sure we talk about the moon and the Milky Way. So before we do that, let me just say a few words about comments on the night focusing. And I'll start here. This image right here, even though it looks like a little oval, this is what you want. This is what you don't want on the left. You want to have a small, tiny little dot of light. That is a focus star. Now, it could be a little tricky because stars are twinkling. That's what happened when I took this image, but that's fine. But you just want this to be as small. And, a good way to start with this is to, during the day, use your automatic exposure, automatic focus, autofocus to focus on the horizon, and then tape your focus ring and switch it over to manual. That works pretty well. It may not be absolutely perfect, but if you're starting, I would recommend doing this because it's going to save a lot of hassle at night. Focusing in the dark is a giant pain in the neck. The way to do focusing at night most effectively is either with a loop or not. You find a really bright star or a planet, and you bring it up on your LCD display here, your display screen, zoom in on it optically, and then focus on it. You just focus on the star. Take the training wheels off, just focus right on that thing. And that's by far the best way to get a decent focus. And when you do this right, it's going to look something like this, really small little dot of light. So that's certainly a point I wanted to make. I'm going to kind of skip ahead here a little ways and I want to talk a little bit about shooting with the moon. So this is your standard monthly moon phase calendar. So you start off with a full moon, X number of days later, you're back to a full moon. And you have all these different phases of the moon, and each one gives you an opportunity. A lot of times people think, oh, I can only shoot during the new moon, but that is not the case. I mean, certainly that's a great time to photograph the Milky Way is on the days, 3 or 4 days on either side of the new moon, but that's hardly the only thing available. I mean, the crescent moon itself is a beautiful object to photograph. With a nice telephoto lens like this, you can see the earth shine on the shadowed part of the moon. There's just some wonderful shots here. Now, of course, the full moon happens around the day of the full moon. I'm going to say a few words about that. But then, anytime there's a clear skies, you can create star trails. I mean, especially this was under an almost completely full moon, and look how bright the foreground is. So just keep this in mind that there's always something to enjoy out there. There's never like, oh, I can't go shooting tonight because the moon is up or something like that. There's always something to be had. And I also wanted to just point out that there are these 3 planning apps I really use the Planet for Photographers app, Planet Pro, PLANIT app. PhotoPills is very popular. Photographers Ephemeris is very popular, rightfully so. All three of these are very, very useful. I've got several presentations on the Planet for Photographers app, but it's an incredibly powerful app. And if you have any more questions about that, I can certainly talk about it. I also strongly recommend creating what I call a night shooting plan. And essentially what this does is this takes an entire night from, let's say, sunset all the way through till dawn, and you put down all the different projects you might like to shoot, Milky Way, star trails, the moon, anything else. Think about what lens you're going to use, what direction you're going to aim, if you need any special gear. And then when during the night are you going to shoot those? Because there's a certain time of night when each one is going to be especially favored. And this gives you a way to kind of put things together into sequence. And, each month I give a free monthly webinar. It's just a half-hour thing to people on topics of interest. This next month, it's actually next Tuesday night. It's going to be on how to create this night shooting plan. So if you go to my website, which is shown here, MikeShawPhotography.com, you go over here to where it says learn, and it comes down to webinars. That'll take you to my webinar page where you can actually register for the thing. This is what it looks like. It's kind of an extreme close-up of me, unfortunately, but there it is. This is the short link to it if you want to just go to it, but it's basically a half-hour free webinar to put this thing together. So it's kind of a fun thing. Let me just talk briefly about how to shoot the full moon, because this is something that a few people mentioned. And here's the dilemma, is these are all shots of the full moon. Notice anything different about them? Well, yeah, the sky is a completely different color. I mean, down here, the sky's black, and over here we have full daylight. So what is going on? Well, it's a good question, because it's kind of a subtle question, and it has it really matters a lot. And the answer to the question is that just because of the way things are, every grasshopper is a different, looks a little different. The full moon rises a little earlier or later than the moment of sunset each month. What do I mean by that? Well, here's May. So this was this last week. And these are for these times, and all of these times in the next few slides are for Kanab, Utah. I was giving a talk there a few weeks ago, and there it is. But here's sunset. This is the actual times of sunset in May of 2021 in Kanab, Utah. Each day the sunset sets a minute later because the days are getting longer. Haven't reached the summer solstice yet. Look what happens to the moonrise. Look at that. 8:08, 9:24. That's like over an hour later. 10:30. I mean, it's like a huge difference in time. And so if you write down, I think I did these right. I calculated these numbers right. There's quite a bit. So this one is 31 minutes before. So the sun is still up on this time, 41 minutes after. And in fact, if you look at all the rest of this year, June, July, August, all the way through to December, you get this incredible range of times. Like the moon rises before sunset, it rises after sunset. So what meaning are we to make of this? Well, let me just go through and explain why this is important. And this will probably take us through the end of the webinar. And so you've probably seen this scene. This is the famous pink glow, the pink behind the topas, that whole thing. So about 15 minutes after sunset or before sunrise, we have this phenomenon that's known as the belt of Venus. It's this pink band in the night sky. And below that is what is in fact, this is the Earth's shadow. So I don't know if you knew that, but that's what it is. And what actually happens is if the Earth is rotating from left to right here, so it's rotating in that direction clockwise, the sun is over on our left. The sun is casting a shadow. The Earth is casting a shadow. I mean, just like anything, that's the Earth's shadow. And when that shadow gets projected, see how I kind of artfully place them next to each other there? That's the magic of PowerPoint. But in all seriousness, this is what happens is this blue thing is literally the shadow of the Earth. And what happens is as the sun sets, this is a sequence of images taken 5 minutes apart, is as the sun goes lower and lower and lower, that shadow goes higher and higher and higher. So this happens every single night. I mean, this is not anything particularly unique. This is Lake Superior, and I mean, there's so many lakes in Minnesota. But here's the thing: is we've got this phenomenon, and now you are in control. You might say, well, okay, I want to have the moon, the full moon, up here. Okay, that's fine. Maybe you want to have the moon right here. Okay, how about having the moon right there? Well, how can you do that? It's so easy. You go back to that table of when does the moon rise happen? And if the moonrise happens before sunset, well, the moon's going to be up here, isn't it? If the moonrise happens right at sunset, that's where the moon's going to be. And if the moonrise happens after sunset, the moon's going to be down here in the Earth's shadow. Super, super straightforward once you think about it. So let me give you an example. So we have this thing right here. This is the moment of sunset, and here's the moon just coming up over the horizon. I drew this in. This is an actual moon, just to be clear. And then a few minutes later, the Earth's shadow has gotten a little higher because the Earth has rotated, and a little bit later. And this is where the moon is during, so that's what a moonrise would look like if the moonrise happens at sunset. And that's the type of picture you get, because the moon is, the moon's in the sky at the moment of sunset. If the moonrise happens before sunset, well, the moon's already up in the sky by the time the sun has set. And guess what? It stays up in the sky as the moon continues to disappear below the horizon. And that's when you have this type of an image, is in that scenario. And if the moonrise happens after sunset, then, you have the moon that rises at this time and it stays buried in the Earth's shadow. And that's when you get this type of an image. So the key then to really understanding how the moonrise happens in terms of this, timing your photography of the full moon, is to appreciate this difference between what the moon looks like in the night sky and when moonrise happens precisely relative to sunrise and sunset. So check this out. What I've done here is I've indicated the 3 days in the rest of 2021 when you can capture a decent moonrise. And there's only 3 days, really. In May, well, May's done. In June, this is evening sunrise. I haven't talked about morning sunset or moonset, but June, not going to happen. On the day before the full moon, June 23rd, the moon rises 40 minutes before the sun is set. Well, that's pretty high up in the sky by the time the sun is set, and it's not a great shot. The next day, the day of the full moon in June, the moon doesn't rise till almost a half an hour after sunset. Well, everything's going to be black. I mean, you might be able to get a nice silhouette, but that's about it. There's a lot of mountains in the Los Padres, so by the time the moon clears the mountains, it's game over. Same thing in July, 39 minutes, 16 minutes after. But look at August. Oh, look at this. On the day before the full moon, August 21st, the moon rises only 6 minutes after sunset. That's good, because that means that when the sun gets a little bit above the horizon, gets a little bit brighter, the foreground gets a little bit darker, their brightnesses are going to be the same. So mark your calendars for August 21st, September 19th, and October 19th. Those are the 3 days to shoot the full moon. And what's interesting about that is those are all the days before the day of the full moon. You're gonna have all these people going out on the day of the full moon, and it's gonna be too late. I mean, by the time the moon rises, the sky's gonna be black. And this invariably happens. I get these emails and all the time from people saying, Mike, I need help with this. I shot the full moon. I think someone was even mentioning this at the start. It's like, the moon's too bright and the foreground's too dark. What am I doing wrong? And the answer is nothing. You're not doing anything wrong. It's just nature being nature. And the key to being part of that is to come out the day before the day of the full moon in these particular months, August, September, and October. So mark your calendars and let me know what you think if you go out to shoot the full moon on these dates. And I think you'll be amazed, especially if you can get it close to the horizon. If you go to Lake Kachuma or someplace like that where it's pretty flat, the Carrizo Plains, where you get a nice clean view of the eastern horizon, and it's going to be a gorgeous thing to see. So those are my recommendations for shooting the full moon. We've got a few minutes left, but let me just I want to say a couple things about your first night out under the stars. So this is what you might want to have as a little checklist. If this is your very first night shooting, is first of all, make sure with the camera, DSLR, make sure you have a camera battery and a memory card. You know, I have had people show up on workshops who have missed one or the other of these. And it's usually a, oh my gosh, I can't believe what I just did. My memory card is at home. Or, oh my gosh, I can't believe I left my battery at home. It's like, well, you know, does anyone else have a spare? And fortunately, a lot of times on a popular workshop, there will be people with the same model so they can share a battery. But make sure you have a red headlight. So camera battery, memory card, red headlight. I would recommend going someplace and arriving an hour before sunset. And this gives you plenty of time to get set up, kind of comfortable, compose your image before it gets really dark. Make sure your tripod is nice and tight. Confirm your settings, confirm you got manual, do all this in the daytime. You know, set your focus on infinity, tape your lens shut. And then when it gets dark, compose your image and tell me about what happens. I'd love to hear stories. It's always a great thing to share your experience. And it's just always a wonderful thing to have darkness come down and the stars come out and just to be able to capture that. One of my first night photographs ever with a digital camera was along the Manzana Trail out of Naira. And I don't know if I mentioned this story either, but I drove up the, you know, Happy Canyon Road, parked at Naira. This was like in November or something. And I thought I was going to be the only person there in the trailhead. And I get there and there's like one other truck. And I mean, you all are intimately familiar with that trailhead. So it's kind of at the middle of nowhere. And it was in November. So there are all these like oak leaves, you know, live oak leaves all over the place. Anyway, this truck that was parked there had clearly been there for some time. They were in there for the duration. And I wasn't, you know, like too freaked out, but I thought this would be a night when I really don't need, it's like 11 o'clock at night when I got there. I don't need to be setting up my tent with all these live oak leaves and crunching and everything because it would make a racket, and who needs that? So I ended up just sleeping in my car, which I often do. And, you know, it was sometime after that, maybe around 1 a.m. or something. And all of a sudden I heard this footstep outside my car, crunch. I thought, well, that's not good. I mean, it's like right outside my car. It was totally dark. I was like, okay. And then I heard another footstep. And I'm like the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up. So this wasn't like a mountain lion or something like this. This is a footstep. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to do it. So I had like a little penknife. You know, that's the only thing I have. Like, I'm not going down without a fight. So I kind of like stealthily get my penknife, kind of unfold it. And I got my flashlight and I'm about ready to open the door. So I turn on my light and I go, yeah. And here's this horse. It's like right there. And this guy had set up a horse on a tie line. And the horse was just like roaming around, I don't know, licking the salt off my car or something. So I'll never forget that. But then later, I don't know if that was that trip or another trip. But then I just went down the trail there a little ways and set up my camera and started shooting Orion and got the beautiful colors of the night sky. And it's just all been history since then. So I hope you have as much excitement shooting the night sky as I always do. I was out just a couple of nights in Death Valley and quick 24-hour trip. And there's just something so exhilarating about being out under the night sky and experiencing that. So anyway, so thanks for having me on this evening. I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have, but it's always exciting to think about the possibilities that you have right in your own backyard.
Hey, Mike, this is Brian.
Hey, Brian, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm having a little bit of dinner right now too.
You do that.
So I know this isn't the night sky, but do you ever do any kind of nighttime photography of animals? You know, either.
That's a great question. I've seen some of the trail cam stuff that you guys have, and it's super. I don't. I mean, you know, I've thought about that, but it's. I've never really had a good amount of patience for wildlife photography per se, and so the quick answer is no, I haven't. But let me ask, why did you ask?
I've kind of messed around with that a little bit over the years, just with game cameras, and I haven't had a whole lot of success. So I don't know. I was just kind of curious, trying to pick up little tips.
What went wrong?
Where do I begin? The first thing that went wrong was I don't think it did a good job of camouflaging the scent of the camera.
Okay.
And I got a picture of a fox before the fox ripped the camera down. And then I had something like 2,000 pictures of the tree moving.
Okay.
So that was the first thing. And I don't know, I didn't really get any great photos. I got some pictures of bear, but they weren't really centered or anything like that. I don't know, it'd be nice to be able to add those photos to my, something I do out in the forest.
What type of camera is it?
I don't know, it's just a pretty typical game camera that I bought.
Okay. Yeah, I wish I had something specific to offer to that. I mean, I'm sure a whole, I won't say subculture, but certainly body of experience that people have who do that sort of thing. And yeah, I would imagine that doing everything you can to remove, I mean, there's always these stories that come to mind. This friend of mine, I remember he was like driving into Yosemite with his daughter to do a backpacking trip, and they stopped to get sandwiches. And one of them had a tuna fish sandwich, and his daughter was holding the bag with the tuna fish sandwich, and there was like this quarter cup of liquid at the bottom of the bag that had dripped out of the tuna fish. And this is my friend who's like going to leave his truck in Yosemite Valley. And he was like, for the love of everything, please don't let that get in my truck, because a bear will pull the truck apart to get into that. So fortunately it didn't. But scents are so important in terms of anything like that. I just don't. I mean, maybe like an alcohol, I would imagine some sort of like a very high proof alcohol, like rub down at the very end, would help dissolve any thing that's slightly greasy or fingerprints or anything like that would carry a scent. I don't know if it would make sense to try to spray something on that would disguise it. I don't know if that would work very well, but well, I'm fascinated, Brian. Yeah, I'll ask you in a few months or a year or so to see what happened, because that's a great project to try out for sure.
Yeah, we might be working with another nonprofit that's not based in Los Padres, but they have applied for a grant to do some sort of mountain lion tracking that's based off of game cameras. And so we're kind of signed on to help them by helping them set up the game cameras and then going out and collecting the cards, every couple months or something like that. So that's something that's out there as well.
Wow. Is this in the Santa Monicas?
No, this will be here in the Los Padres.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure that there's got to be some sort of an online forum, some like Nat Geo type group or something where people have, like if I would maybe contact, well, I don't know, you could just contact some, like there's a person called Franz Lanting. He's a Nat Geo photographer, and he does wildlife, and he's just superb. And I don't know if he has a blog or some other information source about, DIY tips or things, because yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you think about it, because it all has to do with really understanding how the animals move through the forest, and like how high above the ground level, and if there's a prevailing wind, like if there's a breeze that comes from upslope to downslope each night, do you want to be, where would you put the camera in that, that every night there's a breeze going in a certain direction, or if there's like some sort of a natural wind break to that, you could kind of tuck it in there, or anything like that. It's a really interesting topic. So
might I interrupt? Sorry, but
yeah.
Perhaps Brian, if you want to follow through Instagram, Parliament of Owls, he does all this game stuff at Santa Monica Natural Reserve. He's taken some amazing pictures of, and some of them actually have made it on Nat Geo, of mountain lions and bears and such. So it's an Instagram that I follow, and it's Parliament of Owls. So I highly suggest maybe you can DM him, and I'm sure he's happy to help, especially for your projects.
Great, Dino.
Yeah. On that one.
Right on. Yeah, I think a lot of times people are really actually quite happy to help. I mean, especially in a sort of a collaborative community type thing like this, where it's not a for-profit endeavor. So Great idea. Yeah, if I come across anything like that, or if I have any thoughts, Brian, I'll be sure to email you, because that's a really interesting idea. I know a few of the rangers at the Santa Monica Mountain area. If that, I don't know, you probably know them too, but if that would help, I could maybe put you in touch with a few of those, and you could ask them if they have any leads or something like that. But yeah, it's fascinating.
That'd be great. And I know there's I think his name is Matthew. He's been doing a lot of photos here in the Los Padres game cameras. I can't remember what his Instagram handle is right now, but I'll probably reach out to him too.
Los Padres wildlife enthusiast. Is that who you're thinking of, Brian?
Yep.
Yeah. I remember him from the there was a Zoom a few months ago that was just very, the cameras. It was really neat to see that. Great. Well, great, you guys. Well, look, thanks so much again for having me on, and hopefully that was helpful and inspiring. If you have any questions, I should probably show you my, in case you haven't seen it, my Instagram stuff. I've got a kind of a kid monitor in my background, and of course, I think tonight's the night that the smoke alarm low battery warning went off. So if you hear a beeping signal, that is definitely. Where's my mouse? I lost my mouse again. Anyway. It's at Mike Shaw Photography on Instagram, and on Twitter it's just Mike Shaw Photo. So if you want more of this type of stuff, that's the place to go to. And the website's mikeshawphotography.com. So yeah, well, give me a shout if you want to. I have a semi-monthly newsletter that goes out. So if you want to, we can put you on the distribution list of that. You can send me an email. My email is mike@mikeshaw. I love my name, obviously. So the email is mike@mikeshawphotography.com. And I'll be happy to include you on the list. Or if you have any questions or just want to share any stories, I always love hearing about it. But thanks so much again, Kendra and Brian, for the invitation to be here this evening. And I certainly look forward to bumping into you in the Los Padres one of these days in the not too distant future. So thanks so much again.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Mike. It was super informative. I can't wait to get this out to our community of photographers, and the recording will be posted tomorrow on YouTube. So thanks for that. And I do highly recommend everybody check out Mike's newsletter. It's so great. I subscribed, and I love getting the updates and seeing the options for workshops and all the cool stuff that's happening in the skies. So thanks again so much, Mike. And thanks everybody for being here tonight. Have a wonderful evening and long weekend.
Indeed. That's right. All right, everyone. Thanks so much again.
Bye. Good night.
All right, take care.
Good night, everyone. Thanks.
You bet.